The Citizen of the World. Written and published by Mindset Academy. Part 1. There comes a moment in the quiet evolution of a thoughtful life when a person begins to sense, often faintly at first and then with growing clarity, that the boundaries by which they have long defined themselves, nation, tribe, profession, reputation, and the countless invisible labels that society so casually distributes, are not the ultimate measure of who they are, nor the final horizon of their responsibility. And in this realization begins the slow awakening of what the ancient philosophers once described as the citizen of the world, a person whose consciousness has expanded beyond the narrow walls of inherited identity, and who now walks through life with a deeper awareness that humanity itself is the greater home in which all individual lives are lived. For most of human history, identity has been shaped primarily by proximity and circumstance. People belong to villages, kingdoms, or empires, and their sense of duty rarely extended far beyond the immediate circle of family, culture, and land. Yet even within those earlier ages there appeared certain individuals whose thinking transcended the invisible fences that confined others, and these rare minds began to speak of a broader belonging, a deeper unity among all human beings, not as an abstract ideal, but as a practical understanding born from reflection, observation, and an unusually disciplined examination of the nature of life itself. To become a citizen of the world is not to abandon one's heritage, language, or homeland, for such things are threads that give texture and meaning to the human story, but rather to recognize that these identities are chapters within a much larger narrative, and that wisdom requires the ability to hold loyalty and universality together without allowing one to suffocate the other. For the mature mind understands that love for one's own culture does not require blindness toward others. And that true strength of identity is revealed not through exclusion, but through the confident embrace of a shared humanity. This transformation rarely occurs suddenly. It unfolds gradually as the individual encounters the vast diversity of the human experience, either through travel, study, reflection, or the quiet observation of the world beyond the immediate borders of habit. And as this exposure deepens, the mind begins to perceive a remarkable truth. Beneath the different languages, beliefs, and customs that fill the surface of human life, there exists a set of shared desires and struggles so universal that they unite every person who has ever lived. Across continents and centuries, people seek dignity, meaning, security, love, and the opportunity to shape their lives with some measure of freedom. And although the forms through which these aspirations are expressed may differ dramatically from one culture to another, the underlying impulse remains strikingly similar, revealing that the human condition itself is far less fragmented than it first appears to the unexamined mind. The citizen of the world therefore begins to see beyond the illusions created by distance and unfamiliarity, understanding that fear of the other often arises not from genuine difference but from ignorance and the absence of thoughtful engagement. And once this realization takes root, a new kind of responsibility begins to form within the soul, for awareness naturally expands the boundaries of moral concern. A person who recognizes the shared humanity of all people cannot easily retreat into the comfortable indifference that once seemed acceptable, for knowledge, when honestly confronted, carries with it the quiet but persistent demand that one act with greater wisdom, fairness, and compassion than before. This does not mean that the citizen of the world attempts to solve every problem or repair every injustice, for such expectations would quickly lead to exhaustion and disillusionment, but rather that they cultivate a steady and principled orientation toward life, one in which their decisions, attitudes, and actions reflect an awareness that the world is not composed of isolated strangers, but of interconnected lives whose paths continually intersect in ways both visible and unseen. In this sense, global citizenship is not primarily a political or geographic identity, but a philosophical posture, a disciplined way of seeing the world that encourages humility, curiosity, and responsibility in equal measure. Humility arises from the recognition that no single culture or perspective contains the entirety of human wisdom, and that every society, no matter how advanced it may appear, carries its own blind spots and limitations. Curiosity emerges from the understanding that learning from others enriches rather than threatens one's identity. And responsibility grows from the awareness that the choices one makes, whether in commerce, communication, leadership, or daily conduct, can influence lives far beyond the immediate circle of familiarity. When a person begins to think in this way, the world gradually transforms from a distant abstraction into a living network of relationships, and everyday actions take on a significance that might previously have gone unnoticed. A purchase made in one country may affect workers in another. A message shared online may shape the perceptions of someone thousands of miles away. A decision made in a boardroom, classroom, or laboratory may ripple outward through systems that connect communities across the globe. The citizen of the world therefore cultivates a kind of thoughtful awareness that seeks to understand these connections rather than ignore them, recognizing that the modern world, with its intricate web of communication, trade, technology, and migration, has created a reality in which isolation is largely an illusion. Yet the emergence of this interconnected world has not automatically produced greater wisdom, and here lies one of the most profound challenges of our age. Technology has shrunk distances, but it has not necessarily expanded understanding, and the speed with which information travels often exceeds the pace at which thoughtful reflection can occur. The citizen of the world must therefore develop the rare discipline of thinking deeply within a culture that often rewards superficial reaction, learning to pause where others rush, to investigate where others assume, and to listen where others argue. This intellectual patience is not a sign of weakness but of maturity, for complex realities cannot be understood through impulsive judgment or emotional convenience. The thoughtful observer recognizes that cultures are shaped by long histories, intricate traditions, and unique circumstances that deserve careful study before criticism or admiration is offered. Through this patient engagement, the citizen of the world develops a more nuanced understanding of humanity itself, discovering that wisdom often lies not in choosing between competing perspectives, but in learning how to integrate them with balance and discernment. Another essential quality of the citizen of the world is moral independence, the capacity to evaluate ideas and systems according to universal principles rather than blind loyalty to group identity. This does not mean rejecting one's community or traditions, but it does require the courage to acknowledge when those traditions fall short of the deeper values that sustain human dignity. History offers countless examples of individuals who demonstrated this form of ethical courage, people who loved their societies enough to challenge them, and who understood that genuine loyalty is expressed not through unthinking conformity, but through the willingness to seek justice, even when it demands uncomfortable honesty. To live as a citizen of the world is therefore to walk a path that is both expansive and demanding, for it asks the individual to cultivate awareness beyond the familiar, to practice empathy across difference, and to maintain integrity even when social pressure encourages convenience instead of principle. Yet those who embrace this path often discover that it brings with it a remarkable sense of freedom, a liberation from the narrow anxieties that arise when identity is confined to fragile boundaries. When one begins to see humanity as a shared endeavor rather than a collection of competing tribes, the mind gains a wider horizon and the heart develops a steadier capacity for understanding. Life itself becomes a journey not merely through places and achievements, but through the unfolding exploration of what it truly means to belong to the human family. And so the citizen of the world continues to walk forward with both curiosity and responsibility, knowing that the journey toward deeper awareness is never complete, and that each generation must rediscover for itself the wisdom required to live within an interconnected world with clarity, humility, and purpose. For the true measure of a global citizen is not how widely they travel, how many cultures they can name, or how impressive their knowledge may appear, but how consistently their actions reflect the quiet recognition that every human life, no matter how distant or unfamiliar, shares the same fragile dignity and the same profound right to be treated with understanding, fairness, and respect. In the long arc of human history, civilizations rise and fall, borders shift, and ideologies compete for dominance, yet the deeper task of humanity remains remarkably constant: to learn how to live together with wisdom greater than our divisions, and with compassion strong enough to overcome the fears that have so often separated us. The citizen of the world accepts this task not as a burden but as an invitation, a call to participate consciously in the ongoing story of humanity, and to contribute, however modestly, to a future in which awareness grows wider, understanding grows deeper, and the ancient dream of a shared human community moves gradually closer to reality.
Part 2. As the mind of the citizen of the world continues to widen beyond the narrow frameworks through which identity is ordinarily constructed, a deeper realization begins to take shape, one that is both humbling and profoundly liberating. The realization that the human story is not composed of isolated destinies unfolding separately across continents, but rather of countless lives intertwined within a vast and intricate web of shared consequence, where the smallest gesture, the quietest idea, and the most subtle decision can travel across distances of time and geography in ways that are rarely visible to the unreflective observer. It is through this awareness that the thoughtful individual begins to recognize that participation in the world is never neutral, that every action carries with it an echo, and that the quality of one's consciousness inevitably shapes the atmosphere in which others must live. For much of human history, individuals were able to imagine their lives as relatively self-contained stories, limited in their influence by the boundaries of village, tribe, or nation. Yet the unfolding of the modern age has steadily dissolved these illusions of separation. Trade routes expanded into global networks. Communication accelerated from letters carried by ship to messages transmitted in seconds, and the movement of people, ideas, and resources began to weave humanity together with a density never before experienced. What was once distant became immediate, and what was once invisible became suddenly present within the field of daily awareness. Yet, the transformation of our physical and technological world has not always been matched by an equal transformation in our thinking. Many continue to approach life with mental habits inherited from eras in which the world seemed smaller and more fragmented, clinging to narrow loyalties and reactive judgments that fail to account for the complexity and interdependence of the modern human condition. The citizen of the world, however, understands that intellectual maturity requires the courage to evolve beyond these inherited limitations, cultivating a perspective that can hold both the richness of local identity and the responsibilities of global awareness, without allowing either to diminish the other. This evolution of consciousness begins with the discipline of observation, for the thoughtful mind recognizes that the world is a living classroom whose lessons are constantly unfolding for those patient enough to pay attention. To observe humanity carefully is to notice both its extraordinary achievements and its recurring failures, to see the remarkable creativity that has produced art, science, philosophy, and systems of cooperation, while also acknowledging the persistent patterns of conflict, fear, and misunderstanding that continue to challenge our collective progress. Such observation is not undertaken in a spirit of cynicism or judgment, but with the quiet curiosity of a student seeking to understand the forces that shape human behavior. The citizen of the world studies the rhythms of societies, much as a naturalist studies ecosystems, recognizing that cultures, like landscapes, are formed through long interactions between history, environment, belief, and circumstance. This understanding gradually dissolves the simplistic narratives that so often dominate public discourse. It becomes increasingly difficult to divide the world into convenient categories of good and bad, right and wrong, superior and inferior, when one begins to appreciate the immense complexity that underlies human systems. Instead of reacting to difference with suspicion or hostility, the citizen of the world learns to approach it with thoughtful inquiry, asking not merely what people believe, but why those beliefs have emerged, what needs they serve, and how they might evolve in ways that bring greater harmony to the shared human experience. Through this process, empathy begins to expand beyond the emotional impulse of sympathy and becomes something far more disciplined and intellectually grounded. True empathy does not simply feel for others. It seeks to understand them, to enter, however imperfectly, into the context that shapes their perception of reality. This effort requires humility, for it demands that one acknowledge the limits of one's own knowledge and the possibility that perspectives formed within a single culture or tradition may not fully capture the richness of the human condition. Yet humility does not lead the citizen of the world into moral confusion or relativism. On the contrary, the deeper one studies the diversity of human cultures, the more certain universal principles begin to reveal themselves with quiet consistency. Across centuries and civilizations, societies flourish when dignity is respected, when justice is pursued with sincerity, when knowledge is valued, and when compassion tempers the exercise of power. Likewise, societies suffer when cruelty becomes normalized, when truth is manipulated, and when fear replaces understanding as the foundation of social life. The citizen of the world therefore learns to navigate the delicate balance between cultural respect and moral clarity. One can honor the traditions and perspectives of others, while still recognizing that certain principles, fairness, honesty, human dignity, are not merely local preferences, but essential foundations for any flourishing society. This recognition brings with it a profound sense of responsibility, for the citizen of the world understands that awareness must eventually translate into action. To see the interconnectedness of humanity, yet behave as though one's choices exist in isolation, would be a form of quiet hypocrisy, a failure to live according to the very insights that awareness has revealed. Action, however, does not always take the dramatic form that popular imagination associates with global influence. More often it appears in subtle and cumulative ways, in the fairness with which one conducts business, in the curiosity with which one engages unfamiliar perspectives, in the restraint shown when confronted with anger, and in the willingness to support institutions and initiatives that contribute to the well-being of communities beyond one's immediate circle. Such actions may appear small when viewed individually, yet history repeatedly demonstrates that the character of societies is shaped less by grand declarations than by the everyday decisions of ordinary individuals. Every generation inherits a world partly constructed by the moral habits of those who came before, and every generation, knowingly or not, participates in shaping the conditions that future generations will inherit. The citizen of the world therefore approaches life with a long horizon in mind, recognizing that responsibility extends not only across geography, but across time itself. The resources we consume, the systems we support, the ideas we encourage, and the values we embody all contribute to the unfolding narrative of humanity. To live with this awareness is not to be overwhelmed by the vastness of the world's challenges, but to be guided by a quiet sense of stewardship. Just as a gardener may not control the weather yet still tends the soil with care, the citizen of the world understands that one cannot control the entire course of human history, but can influence the immediate sphere of one's own conduct. Over time, this practice of thoughtful engagement cultivates a deeper sense of belonging, one that transcends the fragile boundaries that so often divide humanity. The citizen of the world does not feel rootless or detached, as critics sometimes imagine, but rather develops a richer and more expansive identity, one that embraces both the uniqueness of one's heritage and the shared destiny of the human family. In this broader identity, there is room for pride without arrogance, for loyalty without hostility, and for curiosity without fear. The individual becomes capable of appreciating the music of distant cultures, the philosophies of unfamiliar traditions, and the struggles of communities whose histories differ greatly from one's own, all while remaining anchored in the values that give personal life its meaning. Such a person moves through the world not as a spectator, but as a participant in a collective journey, aware that the evolution of humanity depends not only on technological progress or political negotiation, but on the gradual expansion of consciousness within the hearts and minds of individuals. For civilizations ultimately reflect the quality of thought that sustains them. When fear dominates thinking, societies become defensive and divided. When curiosity and wisdom guide thinking, societies become more open, cooperative, and resilient. The citizen of the world therefore understands that the most important frontier is not geographical, but psychological. The boundaries that most urgently need expansion are those within the human mind itself. The limits of empathy, the habits of judgment, and the assumptions that prevent people from recognizing their deeper unity. To participate in this expansion of consciousness is perhaps the most meaningful contribution an individual can offer to the unfolding story of humanity. And so the citizen of the world continues the journey with patience and determination, aware that progress is rarely linear and that the path toward greater understanding often passes through periods of conflict, confusion, and renewal. Yet beneath the turbulence of history there remains a persistent possibility that humanity, through reflection, learning, and courageous dialogue, may gradually cultivate the wisdom required to live together not merely as neighbors on the same planet, but as conscious participants in a shared destiny. In this quiet hope, the citizen of the world finds both purpose and direction, walking forward with the understanding that every thoughtful action, every honest conversation, and every moment of genuine understanding contributes in its own way to the slow but enduring construction of a more enlightened human community. Part 3. As the consciousness of the citizen of the world deepens, there emerges a quiet, but powerful transformation in the way the individual perceives difference itself, for what once appeared as division slowly reveals itself as variation within a greater unity, much like the countless waves that rise and fall upon the surface of a single vast ocean. The untrained mind, accustomed to categorizing reality into rigid distinctions of us and them, friend and stranger, familiar and foreign, often experiences difference as a threat or inconvenience. Yet the reflective mind, having traveled further into the discipline of observation and understanding, begins to perceive that diversity is not merely an accident of geography or history, but a fundamental characteristic of the human condition itself, a living expression of humanity's boundless capacity for creativity, adaptation, and meaning. To encounter the world through this lens is to see that every culture is in some sense a long conversation between generations, an unfolding attempt by communities of people to answer the enduring questions of existence: how to live, how to organize society, how to honor what is sacred, how to confront suffering, and how to cultivate joy in the midst of uncertainty. Each civilization, whether ancient or modern, has offered its own interpretations, shaped by environment, history, and imagination, and when viewed with patience rather than prejudice, these interpretations reveal an extraordinary mosaic of human thought and experience. The citizen of the world does not approach this mosaic with the impulse to rank cultures in a hierarchy of superiority or inferiority, for such judgments often reveal more about the insecurities of the observer than about the realities of the societies being observed. Instead, the mature mind seeks to understand the underlying principles that animate different ways of life, recognizing that wisdom may appear in forms unfamiliar to one's own upbringing. A proverb spoken in a distant village, a ritual practiced for centuries, or a philosophical idea preserved within an ancient text may contain insights that illuminate aspects of life that one's own culture has overlooked. This openness to learning does not require the abandonment of personal values or convictions. Rather, it strengthens them by exposing them to the refining influence of dialogue and comparison. Ideas that survive thoughtful examination across cultural boundaries often prove to be more resilient, more humane, and more adaptable than those that exist only within the closed circle of a single tradition. In this way, the citizen of the world develops a form of intellectual hospitality, welcoming new perspectives not as threats to identity, but as opportunities for deeper understanding. Yet such openness demands a rare kind of discipline, for the human mind possesses a natural tendency to seek comfort in familiarity and to interpret unfamiliar ideas through the narrow filter of its own assumptions. Without conscious effort, even well-intentioned observers may misinterpret the practices and beliefs of others, projecting their own cultural frameworks onto realities that arise from entirely different historical and philosophical foundations. The citizen of the world therefore cultivates the habit of intellectual patience, resisting the temptation to draw immediate conclusions, and instead allowing understanding to unfold gradually through listening, questioning, and reflection. This patience is not merely a social courtesy. It is a philosophical commitment to truth, for genuine understanding rarely emerges from hurried judgments or superficial impressions. As this discipline matures, the individual begins to perceive a subtle but profound pattern running through the diversity of human experience. Beneath the differences of language, custom, and belief, there exists a shared search for meaning, a universal human desire to locate oneself within the larger story of existence. Some cultures express this search through spiritual traditions, others through philosophical inquiry, artistic creation, or scientific exploration. yet the impulse itself remains remarkably consistent. This recognition fosters a sense of kinship that transcends superficial differences. The citizen of the world sees, in the struggles and aspirations of distant communities, reflections of the same questions that have guided humanity since the earliest days of civilization. How should power be used? What obligations do individuals owe to one another? What does it mean to live a good life? These questions echo through the teachings of philosophers, prophets, poets, and reformers across time and geography, suggesting that the human journey is, at its deepest level, a collective exploration rather than a series of isolated paths. Yet the awareness of shared humanity does not eliminate conflict or disagreement. In fact, the more deeply one studies the world, the more clearly one sees that sincere and thoughtful people can arrive at profoundly different conclusions about how society should be organized or how moral principles should be applied in practice. The citizen of the world therefore learns to navigate disagreement without surrendering to hostility, recognizing that the ability to engage respectfully with opposing ideas is one of the most important skills required in an interconnected world. Dialogue, when approached with sincerity and humility, becomes a powerful instrument for growth. Through conversation, individuals discover not only the weaknesses in their own reasoning, but also the unexpected wisdom embedded in perspectives that once seemed alien or misguided. In this way, disagreement, rather than fragmenting the human community, can become a catalyst for deeper understanding and more refined solutions to the challenges that societies inevitably face. The citizen of the world also recognizes that the capacity for dialogue must be accompanied by the courage to defend principles that protect human dignity. While cultural diversity enriches the human experience, there remain certain ethical boundaries that cannot be ignored without serious consequence. Practices that deny basic freedoms, exploit vulnerability, or perpetuate injustice cannot be shielded indefinitely by appeals to tradition or cultural autonomy. Here the citizen of the world walks a delicate path, balancing respect for cultural complexity with the conviction that certain values, fairness, compassion, and the inherent worth of every individual are essential to the flourishing of humanity as a whole. This balance requires wisdom, for moral certainty without understanding can become oppressive, while understanding without moral clarity can become passive complicity. Through this careful navigation, the citizen of the world develops what might be called ethical maturity, a quality that combines empathy with discernment and conviction with humility. Such maturity allows the individual to participate in global conversations not as a voice of condemnation or superiority, but as a thoughtful contributor seeking solutions that honor both human diversity and human dignity. As the years pass and experience deepens, the citizen of the world begins to appreciate that the true measure of global awareness is not the accumulation of facts about distant places, but the transformation of perception itself. One no longer sees the world as a collection of separate territories, but as a living tapestry of relationships, where the well-being of one region inevitably influences the well-being of others. Environmental challenges, economic systems, technological innovations, and cultural movements all cross borders with increasing speed, reminding humanity that its future will be shaped not by isolated decisions, but by cooperative wisdom. The citizen of the world understands that the problems of the 21st century cannot be solved within the mental frameworks of the past, and that new forms of cooperation, imagination, and responsibility will be required if humanity is to navigate the complexities that lie ahead. Yet within these challenges, there is also extraordinary opportunity. Never before in history have so many people possessed the ability to communicate across cultures, to learn from one another, and to collaborate on projects that span continents. The same forces that can amplify misunderstanding also possess the potential to accelerate understanding, provided that individuals approach them with awareness and intention. The citizen of the world therefore embraces a dual commitment: to deepen personal understanding while contributing, however modestly, to the broader effort of cultivating wisdom within the human community. This may occur through education, dialogue, innovation, or simply through the example of thoughtful living. Yet each contribution adds another thread to the evolving fabric of global consciousness. For in the end, the transformation of the world does not occur solely through institutions or governments, but through the gradual awakening of individuals who recognize that their identity extends beyond the narrow boundaries of tribe or nation. These individuals become bridges between cultures, translators of ideas, and quiet advocates for the possibility that humanity can learn to live not as rivals competing for survival, but as partners in a shared and remarkable journey. The citizen of the world walks this path with patience, knowing that the expansion of human understanding is one of the most demanding and necessary tasks of our age, and that every effort to see more clearly, listen more deeply, and act more wisely contributes to the unfolding story of a species still learning what it truly means to inhabit the same small and extraordinary planet together. Part 4. There is a moment in the intellectual maturation of the citizen of the world when the question of responsibility rises quietly but persistently within the mind, a question that cannot easily be dismissed once awareness has expanded beyond the comfortable borders of familiar concern. For to see the world clearly is to realize that knowledge itself carries weight, and that understanding the interconnected nature of human life inevitably invites a deeper reflection upon the role one plays within that vast and unfolding network of influence. The individual who once moved through life with the assumption that their choices were largely private and self-contained begins to perceive a far more intricate reality, one in which the smallest actions participate in a chain of consequences that may extend far beyond immediate awareness. This realization does not emerge as a sudden moral burden imposed from the outside, but rather as a natural development of consciousness itself. When the mind truly grasps the profound truth that the well-being of distant communities, ecosystems, and future generations is subtly linked to the decisions made in the present moment, it becomes increasingly difficult to retreat into the narrow perspective of isolated self-interest. The citizen of the world, therefore, begins to cultivate a deeper sense of stewardship, understanding that to live thoughtfully within an interconnected world is to accept a measure of responsibility for its direction. Stewardship, however, must be approached with wisdom rather than anxiety, for the problems that confront humanity are vast, complex, and often resistant to simple solutions. The thoughtful individual recognizes that no single person can repair every injustice, solve every crisis, or guide the course of history alone. Yet this recognition does not lead to despair or passivity. Instead, it encourages a more balanced and sustainable approach to responsibility, one that focuses on the sphere of influence available to each person while maintaining awareness of the broader context in which that influence operates. In practical terms, This means that the citizen of the world approaches everyday decisions with a heightened sensitivity to their wider implications. The products one consumes, the information one shares, the institutions one supports, and the attitudes one cultivates all contribute in subtle ways to shaping the systems that define collective life. What may appear to be a simple personal choice is often connected to economic, environmental, or cultural networks that extend across continents. To live with awareness of these connections is not to become paralyzed by overthinking every detail of existence, but to develop a steady habit of reflection that gradually aligns personal conduct with the principles of fairness, sustainability, and human dignity. Over time, this alignment becomes less of a deliberate effort and more of a natural expression of one's character, much as a musician who has practiced for years eventually performs with fluidity rather than conscious strain. The citizen of the world also understands that responsibility must be balanced with humility, for even the most well-intentioned efforts can produce unintended consequences when undertaken without sufficient understanding. History offers many examples of interventions, political, economic, and cultural, that were guided by noble intentions, yet ultimately disrupted the delicate structures of societies that outsiders failed to fully comprehend. For this reason, the mature global citizen approaches action with both courage and caution, seeking knowledge before imposing solutions, listening before prescribing remedies, and respecting the autonomy of communities whose experiences and traditions provide essential context for the challenges they face. This humility does not weaken the commitment to justice or compassion. Rather, it refines it, ensuring that the desire to help does not inadvertently reproduce the very inequalities it seeks to address. True responsibility, therefore, requires a balance between initiative and restraint, between the urgency of moral concern and the patience required to understand complex realities. Another dimension of responsibility emerges in the realm of dialogue and communication. In an age when ideas travel across the world within seconds, the words spoken or written by individuals can influence the perceptions and attitudes of audiences far beyond their immediate circle. The citizen of the world recognizes that language itself carries power, the power to inflame division or to cultivate understanding, to distort truth or to illuminate it. This awareness encourages a disciplined approach to communication, one that values accuracy, fairness, and thoughtful expression. Rather than contributing impulsively to the endless stream of reaction that dominates modern discourse, the thoughtful individual learns to pause, reflect, and consider whether their voice will clarify or confuse, heal or harm. Such restraint may appear insignificant within the vast noise of global communication, yet it contributes to a gradual shift in the tone and quality of public conversation. Every moment in which truth is defended with calm integrity, every instance in which empathy replaces hostility, and every effort to explain rather than condemn adds a small but meaningful contribution to the cultivation of a more thoughtful global community. Responsibility also extends into the realm of knowledge itself. The citizen of the world does not treat education merely as a tool for personal advancement, but as a lifelong commitment to understanding the forces that shape human existence. Economics, history, ecology, philosophy, and cultural studies are not abstract disciplines removed from daily life. They are lenses through which the complex dynamics of the modern world become more intelligible. Through this continued learning, individuals become better equipped to participate in the conversations and decisions that will shape the future. Ignorance, when combined with influence, can be profoundly destructive, while informed awareness strengthens the capacity for wise judgment. Yet knowledge alone is not sufficient. The citizen of the world must also cultivate character, for it is character that determines how knowledge will be used. Intelligence without integrity can easily become a tool of manipulation or exploitation, while wisdom guided by ethical conviction becomes a force for constructive transformation. The cultivation of character requires consistent effort, the willingness to confront one's own biases, to question assumptions inherited from culture or upbringing, and to hold oneself accountable to standards of fairness and compassion, even when doing so is inconvenient or unpopular. In this process, the individual gradually becomes a living example of the values they seek to promote in the wider world. Influence spreads not only through formal authority or public recognition, but through the quiet power of example. The way a person treats colleagues, strangers, and adversaries alike sends subtle signals about what kind of society they believe is possible. The citizen of the world therefore understands that the most enduring contributions to humanity often arise not from dramatic gestures, but from the steady practice of integrity in daily life. A teacher who encourages curiosity, a business leader who values fairness over short-term profit, a journalist who pursues truth despite pressure, or a neighbor who extends kindness across cultural boundaries, all participate in the slow but essential work of shaping a more humane world. Over time, this commitment to responsibility deepens into a sense of purpose that transcends individual ambition. The citizen of the world comes to see life not merely as a personal journey of achievement, but as a meaningful participation in the larger unfolding story of humanity. Each generation inherits a world shaped by the choices of those who came before, and each generation, through its collective decisions, determines the conditions under which future generations will live. The awareness of this continuity invites individuals to consider how their own lives might contribute to a legacy of wisdom rather than division, cooperation rather than conflict, and understanding rather than fear. Such reflections do not require grand titles or extraordinary circumstances. They require only the courage to live thoughtfully within the present moment, while holding in mind the vast horizon of human possibility. For the citizen of the world understands that history is not written solely by famous leaders or celebrated innovators. It is written by the countless ordinary individuals whose daily choices gradually shape the moral and intellectual climate of their societies. And so the thoughtful individual continues forward with quiet determination, aware that the path of global citizenship is not a destination reached once and for all, but an ongoing practice of awareness, responsibility, and ethical engagement. In walking this path, one participates in a tradition that stretches across centuries, a tradition of thinkers, explorers, reformers, and ordinary citizens who believed that humanity, despite its divisions and imperfections, possesses the capacity to grow in wisdom and compassion. To live as a citizen of the world is therefore to hold faith in that possibility, and to act, day by day, in ways that help bring it closer to reality. Part 5. As the citizen of the world continues to deepen in awareness and responsibility, another realization slowly unfolds within the quiet chambers of reflection, one that alters not only how the individual perceives humanity, but also how they perceive themselves within the unfolding movement of history. For when a person begins to understand the vast continuity of human experience, stretching backward through centuries of struggle, discovery, and aspiration, it becomes impossible to regard one's life as an isolated event. Instead, life reveals itself as a brief but meaningful chapter within a much larger narrative, a story that began long before one's birth and will continue long after one's own footsteps have faded from the earth. This awareness introduces the citizen of the world to a deeper relationship with time itself. Many people experience time only through the narrow lens of personal urgency, deadlines, ambitions, immediate pleasures, and temporary disappointments. But the reflective mind gradually expands its perspective to include the long arc of human development. When viewed from this broader horizon, the triumphs and failures of civilizations become lessons rather than distant curiosities, and the patterns of history begin to illuminate the challenges of the present. One discovers that humanity has repeatedly confronted similar dilemmas across different eras. The struggle between cooperation and conflict, the tension between freedom and authority, the delicate balance between innovation and tradition. Empires have risen with great confidence only to collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Ideas once dismissed as impossible have transformed entire societies, and individuals whose voices seemed small in their own time have eventually reshaped the moral direction of nations. The citizen of the world studies these patterns not as an academic exercise, but as a guide for navigating the present. For history, when examined with patience and honesty, reveals the enduring forces that shape human progress: courage, curiosity, imagination, and the persistent effort to expand the circle of understanding. Through this study, the individual begins to recognize that every generation stands at a crossroads between repeating the mistakes of the past and learning from them. The knowledge accumulated through centuries of experience provides humanity with an extraordinary inheritance, yet that inheritance must be consciously examined and applied if it is to serve as a foundation for wiser decisions. The citizen of the world therefore approaches the past with both respect and discernment. One honors the achievements of earlier generations, while acknowledging that no era possesses complete wisdom. Traditions that once served a valuable purpose may require revision as circumstances evolve, and beliefs inherited without reflection may obscure new possibilities for human flourishing. This balanced perspective allows the individual to appreciate the richness of cultural heritage without becoming imprisoned by it. The past becomes a source of insight rather than a rigid blueprint, and the future becomes a field of responsibility rather than a distant abstraction. From this vantage point, the citizen of the world also begins to see that the story of humanity is not merely a sequence of political events or economic developments, but a gradual unfolding of consciousness itself. Each era contributes new ideas about justice, knowledge, and human dignity, slowly expanding the moral imagination of societies. There was a time when slavery was accepted as a normal institution across much of the world, a time when education was reserved for a privileged few, a time when the voices of entire populations were excluded from the decisions that shaped their lives. Yet through the persistent efforts of thinkers, reformers, and ordinary citizens who refused to accept injustice as inevitable, these conditions began to change. The citizen of the world understands that progress, though real, is rarely smooth or permanent. Advances in human rights and understanding are often followed by periods of resistance or regression, reminding us that the work of building a just and compassionate society must be renewed by each generation. This recognition transforms the way one approaches personal purpose. Rather than seeking fulfillment solely through individual success or recognition, the thoughtful individual begins to ask a deeper question: how might my life contribute, even in a modest way, to the ongoing evolution of human understanding? For some, the answer may lie in education, in nurturing the curiosity and potential of younger minds. For others, it may emerge through innovation, leadership, artistic expression, or the patient work of building institutions that serve the common good. Yet the citizen of the world recognizes that influence does not always require public visibility. The quiet acts of integrity performed in daily life, honesty in business, fairness in judgment, kindness across cultural boundaries, create ripples that extend outward through networks of relationship. Human societies are shaped not only by grand policies, but by the countless decisions made by individuals who determine, moment by moment, whether fear or wisdom will guide their actions. Another dimension of global citizenship emerges in the recognition that the challenges facing humanity are increasingly shared challenges. Environmental changes, technological transformations, economic interdependence, and public health crises remind us that the well-being of one region cannot be entirely separated from the well-being of others. The air we breathe, the oceans that regulate climate, the digital networks that transmit knowledge and influence, all connect people across borders in ways that were unimaginable to earlier generations. This reality requires a new form of thinking, one that moves beyond the narrow calculations of short-term advantage and begins to consider the long-term health of the planetary community as a whole. The citizen of the world, therefore, cultivates a mindset of stewardship, understanding that the earth itself is not merely a resource to be consumed, but a shared home whose balance must be maintained if future generations are to thrive. Such stewardship demands cooperation on a scale that challenges traditional political and cultural divisions. It asks societies to recognize that survival and prosperity in the modern age depend not only on competition, but on collaboration. Yet cooperation cannot be sustained without trust, and trust grows only where honesty, fairness, and mutual respect are practiced consistently. For this reason, the citizen of the world places great value on dialogue that seeks common ground rather than amplifying division. Even when disagreements remain unresolved, the effort to understand opposing perspectives contributes to a climate in which peaceful solutions remain possible. This commitment to dialogue reflects a deeper philosophical insight that truth often emerges through the interaction of diverse viewpoints rather than through the dominance of a single voice. Just as scientific discovery progresses through debate and experimentation, social progress frequently arises from the exchange of ideas across cultural and intellectual boundaries. The citizen of the world therefore approaches difference not as a problem to be eliminated, but as an opportunity for learning and refinement. In doing so, the individual helps cultivate a global culture in which curiosity replaces suspicion and collaboration replaces hostility. Over time, this orientation toward life generates a quiet but profound transformation within the individual. The anxieties that arise from narrow competition gradually give way to a broader sense of belonging. The world no longer appears as a chaotic arena of rival groups, but as a complex and evolving community in which every person participates in the shared task of shaping the future. The citizen of the world understands that this future will be determined not only by technological innovation or economic power, but by the moral and intellectual qualities cultivated within human consciousness. If fear and ignorance dominate, the tools of progress may become instruments of destruction. But if wisdom, empathy, and curiosity guide the development of society, those same tools can help humanity address challenges that once seemed insurmountable. And so the citizen of the world continues the journey with patience and determination, aware that the expansion of human understanding is one of the most significant tasks of our time. Each thoughtful conversation, each act of cooperation across cultural boundaries, and each effort to learn from the experiences of others becomes part of a larger movement toward a more connected and enlightened global community. In this quiet dedication lies the true spirit of global citizenship, not a title or a slogan, but a lifelong practice of seeing humanity clearly, acting responsibly, and believing that the shared future of the world can be shaped by those who choose wisdom over fear and understanding over division. Part 6. There comes a stage in the inner development of the citizen of the world when the question of identity begins to take on a deeper and more reflective meaning. For as the mind expands beyond the inherited boundaries of tribe, nation, and custom, it must eventually confront the delicate challenge of integrating these local identities with the broader awareness of humanity as a whole. This is not a simple transition, nor is it a process that occurs without careful reflection, because identity, once formed, possesses a powerful emotional gravity. It is woven from childhood memories, family traditions, language, rituals, and the countless small details through which a person first learns what it means to belong somewhere in the world. To become a citizen of the world is therefore not an act of abandoning one's roots, nor a rejection of the cultural soil from which one has grown. On the contrary, the mature global citizen understands that identity is enriched, not diminished, when it is held with both loyalty and openness. The village, the city, the nation, and the cultural heritage that shape a person's earliest understanding of life are not obstacles to global awareness, but essential foundations upon which broader understanding can be built. Yet problems arise when identity becomes rigid, when the natural pride one feels in their heritage transforms into a defensive attachment that resists learning from the wider human experience. History offers countless examples of societies that withdrew into narrow definitions of belonging, treating difference not as a source of enrichment, but as a threat to be suppressed or feared. In such moments, the energy that might have been used to expand human understanding becomes trapped within cycles of suspicion and conflict. The citizen of the world recognizes that this tendency toward narrow identity is not merely a political phenomenon, but a psychological one. The human mind naturally seeks security, and group identity often provides a sense of certainty in a world that is otherwise complex and unpredictable. When people feel uncertain about the future or overwhelmed by rapid change, they may retreat into familiar symbols of belonging, hoping that these boundaries will restore a sense of stability. Yet the thoughtful observer understands that true stability cannot be built upon exclusion or fear. The world has grown too interconnected for such strategies to succeed, and attempts to isolate societies from the broader currents of global life often produce greater tension rather than lasting security. The citizen of the world therefore seeks a more balanced path, one that honors the richness of cultural identity while recognizing the deeper unity that binds all human beings together. This balanced perspective requires a subtle kind of wisdom, the ability to appreciate the uniqueness of one's own cultural inheritance without allowing it to become the sole lens through which all other cultures are judged. When approached with humility and curiosity, the encounter with other ways of life becomes an opportunity to refine one's understanding of the world rather than to defend it against imagined threats. The citizen of the world may listen to the music of distant traditions, study the philosophies of unfamiliar civilizations, or observe the social customs of communities shaped by very different histories. In doing so, one gradually realizes that the human imagination has produced an astonishing diversity of expressions through which people attempt to answer the same fundamental questions of existence. What does it mean to live a meaningful life? How should individuals relate to one another within a society? What obligations do we carry toward future generations? These questions echo across cultures, and while the answers may vary in form, the shared effort to address them reveals a profound unity beneath the surface of difference. This awareness begins to soften the rigid boundaries that once divided the world into competing identities. The citizen of the world learns to see culture not as a fortress, but as a conversation, a dynamic exchange of ideas, values, and experiences that evolves as societies interact and learn from one another. Indeed, much of humanity's greatest progress has emerged from moments of cultural exchange. Scientific knowledge traveled along ancient trade routes. Philosophical insights crossed continents through translation and dialogue, and artistic traditions blended to create new forms of expression that enrich the global heritage of humanity. Even the languages people speak today often carry the traces of centuries of interaction, borrowing words and ideas from distant sources in ways that reflect the long and intricate story of human connection. The citizen of the world understands that such exchanges are not signs of cultural weakness, but evidence of humanity's extraordinary capacity for adaptation and creativity. Just as ecosystems flourish through diversity, human societies often grow stronger when they remain open to learning from the experiences of others. Yet openness must be guided by discernment. Not every idea encountered in the global exchange will align with one's values, and not every cultural practice will withstand careful ethical examination. The citizen of the world therefore combines curiosity with thoughtful judgment, seeking to understand before evaluating and evaluating with fairness rather than prejudice. Through this process, the individual develops what might be called an expanded identity, one that includes local belonging but is not confined by it. A person may feel deep affection for their homeland, while also recognizing that their responsibilities extend beyond national borders. One may cherish their native language, while appreciating the beauty and insight carried by others. This expanded identity produces a unique sense of freedom. The citizen of the world no longer feels compelled to defend every aspect of their culture uncritically, nor to reject unfamiliar ideas simply because they originate elsewhere. Instead, identity becomes a living and evolving framework through which new knowledge can be integrated without losing the continuity of personal history. Such freedom also encourages intellectual courage. When individuals are no longer trapped within rigid boundaries of identity, they become more willing to question inherited assumptions and to explore new possibilities for cooperation and understanding. The citizen of the world therefore approaches global challenges with a mindset that transcends narrow competition. Rather than asking how one nation or group can dominate another, the thoughtful individual asks how diverse communities might collaborate to address shared concerns. Climate change, technological ethics, economic inequality, and public health are not problems that respect political borders. They require solutions shaped by collective intelligence and mutual respect among cultures that must learn to work together despite their differences. In this context, the citizen of the world becomes a bridge between perspectives, someone capable of appreciating the concerns of multiple communities while seeking common ground that allows cooperation to emerge. One becomes connected not only to the people of one's own community, but to the countless individuals across the planet who are striving, in their own ways, to build lives of dignity, meaning, and hope. This recognition fosters a quiet sense of solidarity that transcends cultural boundaries. The joys and struggles of distant communities begin to feel less remote, and the successes of others are celebrated not as foreign achievements, but as contributions to the collective progress of humanity. The citizen of the world therefore carries within their mind and heart a dual awareness, the intimate familiarity of their own cultural home and the expansive horizon of a shared human destiny. And it is within this balance, between rootedness and openness, tradition and discovery, loyalty and universal responsibility, that the philosophy of global citizenship finds its most meaningful expression. For the individual who learns to walk this path becomes not merely a traveler through the world, but a participant in its gradual awakening, someone who understands that the true measure of civilization lies not in the power of its institutions, but in the breadth of compassion and wisdom cultivated within the human spirit. Part 7. There arrives, in the inward journey of the citizen of the world, a profound moment of realization in which the individual begins to perceive that the greatest barriers dividing humanity are not always built from geography, language, or political institutions, but from something far more subtle and deeply rooted within the human condition itself. These barriers arise quietly in the mind, forming through years of habit, fear, misunderstanding, and inherited narratives that shape how individuals interpret the world long before they consciously begin to question those interpretations. For much of life, people move through their days unaware that their perception of reality is filtered through countless assumptions learned from family, culture, education, and social expectation, assumptions so familiar that they feel indistinguishable from truth itself. Yet the citizen of the world gradually discovers that the mind, like a landscape cultivated over many seasons, can contain both fertile fields of insight and neglected corners where unexamined ideas continue to grow in darkness. To walk the path of global understanding, therefore, requires not only curiosity about the external world, but also a willingness to explore the inner terrain of thought itself. One must learn to observe how beliefs are formed, how judgments arise, and how emotions influence perception in ways that either expand or restrict one's ability to understand others. This inward examination is not an exercise in self-criticism, but rather an act of intellectual honesty. The thoughtful individual recognizes that every human being carries certain biases, shaped by the experiences and information available during their formative years. These biases are not signs of moral failure, but reflections of the natural process through which the mind organizes complexity. The difficulty arises only when such patterns remain unconscious, guiding decisions and attitudes without the moderating influence of reflection. The citizen of the world, therefore, cultivates a habit of awareness, learning to pause before accepting immediate conclusions and asking whether alternative interpretations might exist. This simple but powerful practice opens the door to deeper understanding because it allows the mind to move beyond the limitations of automatic thinking and to engage with the richness of human diversity more thoughtfully. Consider how often conflicts between cultures or nations emerge from misunderstandings that might have been resolved through patient dialogue and careful listening. Words carry different meanings in different contexts. Customs reflect unique historical circumstances, and behaviors that appear puzzling or even troubling to one observer may hold deep significance within another tradition. When individuals fail to recognize these complexities, they may interpret unfamiliar actions as deliberate hostility or moral deficiency, reinforcing stereotypes that deepen division. But when the citizen of the world approaches such encounters with humility and curiosity, new possibilities for connection begin to appear. Humility plays an essential role in this process, for it reminds the individual that no single perspective contains the entirety of truth. Each culture, each intellectual tradition, and each generation contributes its own insights to the collective conversation of humanity, and wisdom grows not from the dominance of one voice, but from the patient weaving together of many. To listen with genuine openness is therefore one of the most transformative practices available to the global citizen. Listening in its deepest form, is not merely waiting for an opportunity to respond, but creating a space in which another person's experience can be expressed fully and received without immediate judgment. Such listening requires patience, empathy, and the willingness to temporarily suspend one's own assumptions. When practiced sincerely, it often reveals unexpected common ground. Beneath the surface differences that distinguish cultures and communities, people share many of the same fundamental desires: the wish to live with dignity, to provide for their families, to contribute meaningfully to society, and to experience a sense of belonging within a larger human story. These shared aspirations form a powerful foundation upon which cooperation can be built. The citizen of the world understands that global harmony does not require uniformity of belief or culture. Rather, it depends upon the recognition that diverse societies can pursue their unique paths while still respecting the universal values that sustain human flourishing. Another essential quality that develops along this journey is patience, a virtue that becomes increasingly necessary as one engages with the complexities of a rapidly changing world. Modern communication technologies have brought distant cultures into immediate contact, creating opportunities for exchange that were unimaginable only a few generations ago. Yet the speed with which information travels can sometimes give the illusion that understanding itself should occur just as quickly. In reality, genuine understanding grows slowly, much like a tree that strengthens its roots before extending its branches toward the sky. Meaningful dialogue between cultures requires time for trust to develop, for misunderstandings to be clarified, and for the gradual recognition that cooperation can produce benefits far greater than conflict. The citizen of the world therefore approaches global challenges with a long-term perspective. Rather than expecting instant solutions to problems that have evolved over decades or centuries, the thoughtful individual contributes patiently to the steady work of building bridges between communities. This patience is sustained by hope, though not the naive hope that ignores difficulties, but a deeper form of hope grounded in the recognition that human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for learning and transformation. Throughout history, societies have repeatedly overcome divisions that once seemed permanent, discovering new ways to organize themselves around principles of justice, freedom, and mutual respect. The citizen of the world draws inspiration from these examples, understanding that progress often begins with small steps taken by individuals who refuse to surrender to cynicism. A conversation that replaces hostility with curiosity, a partnership that unites communities across cultural lines, or an act of generosity extended toward strangers. Each of these moments contributes quietly to the evolution of human consciousness. As this awareness deepens, the individual begins to feel a growing sense of responsibility for the atmosphere of thought and emotion that shapes collective life. Just as negative attitudes can spread through communities and intensify conflict, positive qualities such as empathy, fairness, and intellectual honesty can also influence the social environment in powerful ways. The citizen of the world therefore strives to embody these qualities not as abstract ideals, but as living practices woven into daily interactions. Whether speaking with neighbors, collaborating with colleagues, or engaging with unfamiliar perspectives encountered through travel or study, one carries the quiet intention of fostering understanding wherever possible. This intention transforms ordinary encounters into opportunities for growth. The marketplace, the classroom, the workplace, and the digital spaces where modern conversations unfold all become arenas in which the principles of global citizenship can be practiced. Gradually, the individual realizes that the journey toward becoming a true citizen of the world is not defined by grand declarations or dramatic achievements, but by the steady refinement of character. It is the discipline of thinking carefully before judging, the courage to revise one's views when presented with new evidence, and the compassion to treat every person as a participant in the shared adventure of human existence. Such refinement does not remove all conflict from the world, for disagreement and competition remain natural aspects of social life. Yet it does transform the way conflicts are approached, encouraging solutions guided by dialogue rather than domination and by creativity rather than resentment. Over time, the citizen of the world becomes a quiet influence within the communities they inhabit. Without demanding recognition, they help create an atmosphere in which thoughtful conversation replaces reflexive hostility, and where cooperation becomes not a rare exception but an ordinary expectation. And so the journey continues, not as a destination to be reached once and for all, but as a lifelong practice of widening the circle of understanding. With every insight gained and every barrier of misunderstanding gently dissolved, the individual participates in a subtle yet profound transformation, one in which humanity moves, step by patient step, toward a future shaped less by fear and more by the shared wisdom of those who have learned to see the world as a common home. Part 8. As the citizen of the world journeys further along the path of awareness, there emerges a profound and almost sacred recognition that the true essence of global citizenship is not measured by travel, diplomas, or accolades, but by the depth of one's perception and the consistency of one's practice in harmonizing thought, word, and action with the principles that sustain life and human dignity across the planet. This realization often arrives quietly, in moments of solitude or reflection, when the mind steps away from the constant noise of daily life and begins to perceive the subtle threads connecting all human beings, not merely as abstract ideas, but as living, palpable currents that flow through the collective existence of societies. It is in these moments that the individual senses the intimate yet invisible fabric that links each human consciousness to another, stretching across time and space, woven of empathy, intention, and shared endeavor. To walk as a citizen of the world is to recognize that one's inner life cannot be isolated from the broader currents of humanity. The thoughts entertained, the values nurtured, and the emotions cultivated ripple outward, influencing the quality of interaction in families, communities, and nations, often in ways that are subtle, unseen, yet cumulatively profound. In this light, morality, ethics, and wisdom become not abstract concepts confined to philosophy or religion, but practical instruments of influence, shaping the collective reality simply through the disciplined cultivation of consciousness. When the mind acts with integrity, the heart responds with empathy, and the voice communicates with clarity and fairness, the individual becomes a quiet fulcrum upon which greater harmony may pivot, even if no one in the immediate vicinity recognizes the contribution being made. Yet this path is neither easy nor comforting, for the citizen of the world soon realizes that the expansion of perspective comes with its own forms of disquiet. To see the suffering, inequities, and injustices that pervade the planet without allowing despair to dominate requires courage, balance, and relentless practice. One cannot move through the world with the illusion that awareness is synonymous with comfort. Understanding the interconnectedness of life demands engagement with reality as it is, not as one wishes it to be, and it demands the cultivation of resilience against the emotional turbulence that such understanding inevitably provokes. This resilience, however, is not a hardening of the heart, but a disciplined softening, an ability to perceive suffering without becoming crushed by it, to witness error without succumbing to cynicism, and to encounter difference without retreating into fear or judgment. It is a delicate equilibrium, cultivated through years of reflective practice, meditation upon human behavior, and deliberate engagement with the vast and diverse tapestry of cultural, philosophical, and historical experience. Through this cultivation, the citizen of the world begins to perceive that even the darkest currents of human action carry within them the seeds of transformation, that cruelty is often rooted in fear, ignorance, or misunderstanding, and that within each encounter lies the possibility for insight, reconciliation, and growth. The citizen of the world also comes to understand the indispensable role of knowledge, not merely as information to be collected, but as wisdom to be integrated into the fabric of daily life. Knowledge without discernment can easily become arrogance, or worse, a tool of domination. Yet knowledge that is paired with reflection, humility, and ethical intention becomes a form of power that elevates both the individual and the collective. To read history, for instance, is not simply to memorize events, but to perceive patterns, to recognize the forces that have shaped societies, to see where ambition, wisdom, fear, and courage have intersected to produce the trajectory of human civilization. From these lessons, the citizen of the world learns patience, for progress is rarely linear, and discernment, for not all apparent victories lead to enduring benefit. Equally, the citizen of the world understands that action must be measured, consistent, and aligned with principle. It is not enough to simply observe the world and its complexities. To possess awareness without action is to cultivate a sterile form of understanding, one that may heighten perception, yet leave the landscape of suffering and potential unchanged. Action need not be grandiose to be effective. It manifests in the cultivation of fairness in interpersonal relationships, in the careful stewardship of resources, in the encouragement of dialogue where misunderstanding threatens division, and in the patient nurturing of ideas and initiatives that strengthen the capacities of communities to flourish. An essential aspect of this practice is the recognition of subtle power, the power of influence that emerges not from position or authority, but from example. Every act of integrity, every word spoken with clarity and compassion, every choice made in consideration of its consequences, contributes invisibly yet significantly to shaping the ethical and cultural climate of society. The citizen of the world thus becomes aware that true influence flows outward from the quality of the individual's consciousness, and that by refining one's mind and character, one participates in the silent but potent shaping of the larger human environment. This awareness also deepens the understanding of human difference. The citizen of the world sees that diversity is not a challenge to be overcome, nor a problem to be corrected, but an essential manifestation of life itself. Each culture, tradition, and worldview represents a unique attempt to understand existence, to negotiate the tension between individual aspiration and communal harmony, and to provide meaning within a world of uncertainty. When approached with humility and attentiveness, these differences become a source of insight, offering lessons in adaptation, resilience, and creative problem-solving that cannot be learned from one perspective alone. Yet embracing diversity does not equate to uncritical acceptance of all practices or beliefs. The citizen of the world discerns between cultural expression and acts that undermine human dignity, recognizing that moral clarity is necessary to guide engagement without compromising principle. This discernment is neither rigid nor simplistic. It arises from careful observation, ethical reflection, and the cultivation of empathy that allows one to comprehend the conditions that give rise to particular behaviors while still upholding universal values such as justice, compassion, and integrity. Through this ongoing practice, the citizen of the world cultivates what might be described as a quiet mastery of both inner and outer life. Inner mastery arises from the disciplined regulation of thought, emotion, and perception, enabling one to respond rather than react, to act from principle rather than impulse, and to maintain equilibrium amid the storms of external circumstance. Outer mastery emerges through influence and example, in the capacity to foster understanding, cooperation, and ethical behavior within the communities one inhabits and interacts with. The synergy of inner and outer mastery produces a life of profound coherence, in which the individual's presence radiates calm authority, compassionate insight, and thoughtful influence. In these ways, the citizen of the world becomes a living testament to the possibility that human beings can transcend the narrow confines of fear, prejudice, and self-interest, and can cultivate a consciousness capable of perceiving the vast web of interconnection that defines the human condition. And in embracing this path, one participates in a timeless endeavor, the shaping of a world not merely of convenience or convenience's illusion, but of ethical, thoughtful, and reflective engagement, where the pursuit of knowledge, the practice of empathy, and the cultivation of moral clarity converge to expand the horizons of human possibility far beyond the confines of individual or collective self-interest. The journey, therefore, continues not as a linear progression toward a fixed endpoint, but as an expansive and unfolding engagement with life itself, in which every thought, word, and action contributes, however subtly, to the ongoing story of humanity, a story that is shared, interconnected, and inseparable from the consciousness of those who move through it with both awareness and care. Part 9. As the citizen of the world proceeds along this expansive path of awareness, a deeper understanding gradually emerges that the human experience in all its complexity is defined not only by what occurs externally, in the domains of politics, commerce, or culture, but also by the inner landscape of consciousness where perception, judgment, and intention reside. To navigate the outer world with wisdom, one must first navigate the inner world with honesty, patience, and clarity, for the mind is both the instrument and the lens through which the events of existence are interpreted. The citizen of the world begins to recognize that the limitations, fears, and prejudices that persist in society are often mirrored within the self, and that the endeavor to expand understanding across borders and cultures must begin with a deliberate and courageous confrontation with one's own interior life. This internal work involves a meticulous examination of assumptions, an unflinching assessment of habits of thought, and a recognition of the subtle ways in which inherited ideas shape perception. Many beliefs, deeply ingrained from early experience, operate below the level of conscious reflection, quietly influencing judgments about people, places, and possibilities. The citizen of the world, aware of the fragility of unexamined certainty, cultivates the discipline of self-inquiry, observing the tendencies of the mind with the same patient curiosity with which one might study the behavior of distant cultures or the rhythms of nature. In doing so, one begins to see that the distinctions between us and them, friend and stranger, known and unknown, are often projections of internal conditioning rather than absolute realities. In this recognition lies the first true step toward global empathy, the understanding that every individual carries within them a personal universe shaped by experience, circumstance, and perception. When one comprehends this, judgment is tempered with patience, and the impulse to react from fear or assumption gives way to the capacity for reflection. To listen, then, becomes a sacred exercise, not merely in politeness or diplomacy, but as an active engagement with the lived reality of another consciousness, an attempt to see the world from a perspective that is simultaneously alien and profoundly human. Such listening demands humility, for it requires acknowledgement that one's own understanding is limited and that wisdom is often dispersed across countless minds and experiences. The citizen of the world does not assume that knowledge or virtue is possessed solely within one's own cultural or intellectual circle. Rather, one recognizes that insight may reside anywhere. In the words of a child, the counsel of a distant elder, the practices of a community long overlooked, or in the quiet observation of nature itself. This recognition fosters openness, and through openness, the mind expands its capacity for comprehension, moving beyond rigid frameworks and embracing the intricate complexity of human life. Yet awareness of complexity brings its own challenges, for it becomes apparent that human societies, while interconnected, are often riddled with contradictions. Individuals and groups simultaneously aspire to goodness and commit acts of harm. They seek justice while perpetuating inequality. They pursue wisdom even as they cling to ignorance. The citizen of the world learns to hold these contradictions without cynicism, recognizing that the path of humanity is neither simple nor linear. It is a path marked by repeated attempts, missteps, corrections, and incremental progress, a story that unfolds not in grand, singular events, but in the steady accumulation of conscious action, reflection, and dialogue. From this perspective, the citizen of the world begins to see responsibility in a new light. Responsibility is no longer a burden limited to immediate obligations or personal ambition. It becomes an ongoing engagement with the consequences of thought, word, and deed, extending outward to influence the broader web of human relationships. Every choice, no matter how small, participates in this network. A decision made in one corner of the world may ripple through economies, ecosystems, and communities in ways that are subtle yet profound. The citizen of the world therefore approaches action with intention, understanding that thoughtful engagement, guided by ethics and empathy, can produce outcomes far beyond what the individual might immediately perceive. This awareness does not paralyze action with anxiety, nor does it demand perfection. Rather, it cultivates discernment, a careful weighing of consequences, and a commitment to integrity that guides behavior even when the outcomes remain uncertain. The citizen of the world learns to act from principle, not convenience, to choose understanding over reaction, and to contribute to the collective life of humanity through consistency of character, clarity of mind, and depth of compassion. In tandem with responsibility, the citizen of the world develops a profound appreciation for patience. The currents of change, whether social, political, technological, or environmental, move with rhythms far slower than individual desire might dictate. Understanding that transformation is gradual, that civilizations rise and fall over centuries, and that the cultivation of human wisdom is an ongoing, multigenerational endeavor, the citizen of the world adopts a long view, seeing life not merely as a series of immediate tasks to be completed, but as participation in a larger, enduring process. This long view fosters resilience, for the individual is less shaken by setbacks and less seduced by the allure of immediate gratification. One learns to perceive obstacles not as permanent impediments, but as lessons, as opportunities to refine judgment, strengthen character, and cultivate insight. Adversity in this framework is not merely a personal challenge, but a mirror reflecting the broader complexities of human existence, revealing the tensions between intention and outcome, between ideal and reality. The citizen of the world also develops a subtle but powerful understanding of influence. One realizes that the capacity to shape human experience does not reside solely in positions of formal authority or in public recognition, but in the steady consistency of thought, word, and action. Every interaction becomes a space in which ethical, reflective, and empathetic behavior may subtly propagate through networks of relationships, extending far beyond the immediate sphere of awareness. In this sense, influence is a natural consequence of internal coherence. When one cultivates clarity, integrity, and compassion within, these qualities resonate outward, creating the conditions for meaningful engagement in the broader social fabric. As this practice deepens, the citizen of the world comes to recognize that the ultimate aim of global citizenship is not control over others or the accumulation of prestige, but the steady cultivation of a life that contributes, however quietly, to the collective awakening of human consciousness. To live in this manner is to accept that human history is written not only by the conspicuous acts of leaders and innovators, but by the persistent, mindful choices of ordinary individuals whose lives, guided by principle and understanding, form the subtle but enduring currents upon which civilizations rise, shift, and endure. In this light, the world itself ceases to appear as a chaotic arena of competing interests and fear-driven impulses. Instead, it begins to reveal the latent potential for cooperation, insight, and shared advancement that exists within every community and every individual. The citizen of the world perceives the intricate lattice of connection binding all humans together, a network that carries both the responsibility and the opportunity to act with wisdom, patience, and compassion, ever mindful that the smallest gesture of understanding may, through the quiet multiplication of influence, contribute to the unfolding story of a more enlightened, more harmonious humanity. And thus the journey of the citizen of the world continues, not as a destination to be reached, but as a continuous cultivation of perception, empathy, responsibility, and ethical practice. A lifelong engagement in which the individual moves through the world not as an isolated entity, but as a conscious participant in the vast and interconnected adventure of human existence. Part 10. In the continuing journey of the citizen of the world, there emerges a realization so profound that it alters the very way the individual perceives life, society, and the interplay of human destinies. The recognition that freedom, true freedom, is inseparable from responsibility, and that the most authentic life is one in which liberty is exercised not in isolation, but in harmony with the collective well-being of humanity. Many people live their lives under the illusion of freedom, believing that autonomy is measured by the absence of restraint or the capacity to pursue personal desire without limitation. Yet the citizen of the world, guided by reflection and experience, understands that unbridled freedom divorced from wisdom inevitably leads to chaos, suffering, and the perpetuation of ignorance. Freedom, in its highest form, is inseparable from the cultivation of discernment, the careful observation of consequence, and the ethical alignment of thought, word, and action. This understanding transforms the citizen's relationship to power, choice, and influence. No longer is power a goal to be pursued for personal gain, nor influence a tool to impose one's will. Instead, power is recognized as the capacity to act in accordance with principle, to shape situations with clarity, and to nurture the conditions under which wisdom, justice, and compassion may flourish. Similarly, choice is no longer trivial or whimsical, but becomes an ethical exercise, in which the consequences of decisions are carefully considered not only for oneself, but for the countless others who are touched, directly or indirectly, by those choices. In this way, the citizen of the world perceives that every moment, no matter how seemingly insignificant, participates in the greater narrative of human destiny. A critical dimension of this realization lies in the understanding of interdependence. No individual exists in isolation. Every human life is connected through networks of social, cultural, economic, and ecological relationships that stretch across continents and centuries. The decisions made in one place reverberate in another. The actions of one generation lay the foundation for the next, and the wisdom or folly of an individual may quietly influence events far beyond their immediate awareness. To live as a citizen of the world is to accept the profound responsibility implicit in this interconnectedness, to act not merely in accordance with personal preference, but with attentiveness to the broader implications of one's presence and participation in the world. Such awareness naturally leads to a cultivation of discernment, patience, and humility. The citizen of the world recognizes that understanding is never complete, and that human affairs are rarely straightforward. Cultural, historical, and psychological forces intertwine in ways that resist simple explanation or prescription. To intervene in the affairs of others, therefore, requires not rashness but careful observation, not assumption but inquiry, and not domination but dialogue. Humility emerges as the recognition that one's own knowledge is limited, and patience as the willingness to act in ways that respect the complexity of life, while advancing understanding, justice, and cooperation. Alongside humility and discernment, empathy becomes a guiding principle. The citizen of the world perceives the lives of others not merely as subjects for observation, but as realities with intrinsic value and dignity. This perception is neither sentimental nor naive. It is grounded in the awareness that human experience, regardless of form or circumstance, is composed of joys, fears, struggles, and aspirations that are universally shared. Empathy, in this sense, is an active engagement with reality. It requires the mind to see clearly, the heart to feel authentically, and the will to respond ethically. When empathy is cultivated alongside knowledge and reflection, it transforms the citizen into a conduit for understanding, a mediator between diverse perspectives, and a participant in the subtle work of creating connection where division might otherwise prevail. The citizen of the world also develops a profound appreciation for the power of education and continuous learning. Knowledge is not merely an accumulation of facts, nor intelligence a measure of personal achievement. True learning is the cultivation of insight that enables one to perceive patterns, understand interrelations, and anticipate the consequences of action with clarity. By embracing this form of knowledge, the individual acquires the capacity to navigate complexity, to foster cooperation across cultural and ideological divides, and to act with foresight that balances ambition with prudence, innovation with ethics, and courage with humility. Yet intellectual mastery alone is insufficient. Wisdom arises when thought is integrated with moral consciousness and applied consistently through action. The citizen of the world, therefore, cultivates both mind and character simultaneously, understanding that the influence of knowledge depends entirely upon the quality of the conscience that wields it. An informed mind without ethical grounding may manipulate, dominate, or deceive. A virtuous heart without understanding may act in ways that are ineffectual or misdirected. Only through the harmonious integration of understanding, reflection, and principled action can the citizen of the world enact change that is meaningful, just, and enduring. This integration manifests in daily life, where ordinary acts, whether in conversation, commerce, or civic engagement, become opportunities for practice and refinement. The choice to speak with clarity rather than rumor, to act with integrity rather than convenience, to extend generosity where suspicion might dominate, becomes a discipline of global significance. Over time, these consistent choices shape character, cultivate influence, and contribute to the moral and intellectual environment of the broader society. In this sense, global citizenship is not abstract or distant. It is lived moment by moment, in the quiet consistency of ethical action and reflective presence. Furthermore, the citizen of the world understands the delicate balance between engagement and detachment. To be fully aware of the suffering, injustice, and complexity of the world without succumbing to despair or cynicism is an essential skill. cultivated through the disciplined regulation of attention, thought, and emotional energy. Engagement without detachment risks overwhelm, while detachment without engagement risks irrelevance. The mature citizen of the world navigates this balance with equanimity, acting with compassion and insight, while preserving the clarity of mind necessary to perceive reality with accuracy and to respond with deliberate effectiveness. Finally, the citizen of the world perceives that the highest expression of human potential is found not in the accumulation of wealth, prestige, or power, but in the capacity to contribute thoughtfully to the shared life of humanity. To cultivate awareness, empathy, integrity, and discernment is to participate consciously in the evolution of human society, to shape its ethical and intellectual trajectory, and to leave a legacy not of dominance, but of wisdom, cooperation, and enduring insight. Each life, when guided by principle and reflection, becomes a subtle but profound force in the ongoing unfolding of civilization, contributing to the gradual expansion of understanding, compassion, and human potential across generations and continents. And so the journey of the citizen of the world continues, not toward a fixed endpoint, but as a continuous unfolding of perception, reflection, and ethical action, a lifelong commitment to living consciously within the intricate web of humanity, understanding that each thought, each word, and each deed is part of the larger story of human destiny, and that the measure of a life well lived is found in the depth of understanding cultivated, the clarity of conscience maintained, and the generosity of spirit extended to all who share this interconnected world. Part 11. As the citizen of the world progresses further along the path of awareness and responsibility, there emerges a subtler, yet infinitely more profound, layer of understanding, the realization that human existence is inseparably intertwined with the rhythms of the planet itself, and that true global citizenship encompasses not only the domain of human relationships, but also the stewardship of the natural world in which all life unfolds. For centuries, human societies have acted as though the earth were an inexhaustible stage upon which ambitions, conflicts, and creativity could be played without consequence. Yet the citizen of the world discerns that the well-being of humanity is inseparable from the well-being of the ecosystems, climates, and species with which it coexists. This recognition transforms the very meaning of responsibility, extending its scope from the affairs of human communities to the stewardship of the living earth that sustains them. In understanding this broader responsibility, the citizen of the world perceives that the health of the planet is neither a peripheral concern nor a mere abstraction. Every action, every consumption of resources, every disruption of natural balance carries reverberations across the web of life. Rivers poisoned, forests destroyed, species eradicated. These are not distant phenomena, but immediate consequences of the choices made by conscious beings, and each choice contributes either to the flourishing or degradation of the collective environment upon which all communities depend. To act responsibly, therefore, is to cultivate awareness of the consequences of behavior, to perceive the invisible threads connecting human prosperity to ecological integrity, and to allow this perception to guide decisions with both prudence and care. Moreover, this understanding deepens the citizen's appreciation for the interdependence not only of human societies, but of all life. The survival, growth, and harmony of one species depend upon the health and balance of others. The wind that carries seeds, the soil that nourishes crops, the water that sustains communities, each is a silent partner in the enterprise of existence. To live as a citizen of the world is to embrace this interdependence, not with sentimentality, but with clarity, acknowledging that every thoughtless act, every exploitative practice, gradually erodes the conditions upon which both human and non-human life rely. In practical terms, this awareness transforms behavior in profound ways. Consumption becomes deliberate rather than impulsive. Technology is approached with discernment, ensuring that its application serves the broader well-being rather than immediate self-interest. Policies are judged not solely by the advantages they bring to one population, but by their ripple effects across societies and ecosystems alike. The citizen of the world, thus, becomes a steward of life in its broadest sense, recognizing that true progress cannot be measured solely by economic metrics, political dominance, or cultural achievement, but by the degree to which human activity enhances, preserves, and honors the complex systems upon which existence depends. Yet this expanded awareness is accompanied by a deeper philosophical insight that the patterns observed in nature reflect principles that may guide human conduct. Ecosystems operate through balance, interconnection, and adaptation. Species survive not through domination alone, but through cooperation, resilience, and responsiveness to changing conditions. Observing these patterns, the citizen of the world discerns analogies for social life. Societies flourish when diversity is valued, when cooperation is nurtured, when resources are managed with foresight, and when resilience is cultivated through understanding rather than suppression. In this way, the natural world becomes not merely a source of sustenance or aesthetic pleasure, but a teacher, offering lessons in ethics, strategy, and the subtle art of coexistence. At the same time, the citizen of the world recognizes that the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom must remain a central pillar of engagement with both human and natural systems. Understanding ecological dynamics, historical patterns, and cultural narratives equips one with the tools necessary to act effectively, rather than reactively, in a world of complexity and interconnection. The accumulation of knowledge, however, is always accompanied by the cultivation of humility, for no single mind, no single generation, possesses perfect understanding of the intricate forces at work in human society or in the natural environment. Awareness of one's limitations, far from diminishing agency, refines judgment, fosters collaboration, and encourages a posture of continuous learning. As these dimensions of responsibility and awareness converge, the citizen of the world develops a profound appreciation for time, not merely as the linear passage of hours, days, and years, but as a vast continuum in which past, present, and future interact. Decisions made today carry consequences far beyond immediate perception, shaping ecosystems, cultures, and social structures for generations yet unborn. To act with awareness, therefore, requires a long view, a patience that balances the urgency of immediate need with the foresight of enduring impact. This temporal consciousness nurtures resilience, tempers impulsivity, and cultivates a sense of ethical gravity. The knowledge that one's actions, however small, participate in the unfolding narrative of life on a planetary scale. From this perspective, the citizen of the world perceives humanity's challenges with both clarity and equanimity. Social inequities, Environmental crises and cultural conflicts are recognized not as mere tragedies, but as the natural outgrowth of historical patterns, human choices, and the complex interweaving of multiple systems. Understanding these patterns does not excuse inaction, but it equips the individual to intervene with intelligence, strategy, and moral insight. Actions guided by this awareness are deliberate, principled, and resilient, reflecting the conviction that change, though often incremental and unseen, can propagate through human and ecological systems in ways that strengthen the overall fabric of life. Finally, the citizen of the world discerns that the highest form of freedom, the deepest expression of global citizenship, is the alignment of inner life with outer action. Inner cultivation of clarity, compassion, patience, and ethical integrity forms the foundation upon which effective and responsible engagement with the world is built. Without this internal grounding, even the most well-intentioned interventions may falter or produce unintended harm. With it, each act, no matter how modest, resonates with purpose, coherence, and enduring influence. And so, the citizen of the world moves forward in a continual interplay of perception, reflection, and action. Every thought is tempered with awareness. Every word carries intention. Every deed participates in the broader currents of life. In embracing responsibility not only toward humanity, but toward the living earth itself, the individual becomes a participant in a timeless, unfolding endeavor, the shaping of a world in which consciousness, wisdom, and ethical action converge to foster harmony, sustainability, and a shared vision of flourishing that spans cultures, continents, and generations. The journey continues vast, unending, and profoundly meaningful, a journey in which the citizen of the world walks not as a spectator, but as an active, thoughtful, and ethically engaged participant in the grand unfolding of life itself.